Welcome to Authors Without Borders Presents. I'm your host for this show, Joyce Keller-Walsh, and my guest is Barbara Sillery, author, producer, magazine writer. You've had so much field experience with film and television, but we're going to speak a little bit about your books today, in particular your most recent book. And what our audience usually likes to know is how to make the sausage. So we'll talk a lot about process. But the most recent book, which is your third of four, or is it your fourth of four?
This is my third in the Haunting series, but my most recent book is based on a documentary I did. It was called Biloxi Memories.
Right. Yeah. And the first two books of the Haunting series is Haunting in Louisiana and Hauntings in Mississippi. Which one came first?
Haunting of Louisiana.
And you were living in Louisiana at that time?
I was living in New Orleans and working as a television producer. And so I did a documentary on all of Louisiana and its very haunted reputation. And it went over so well, and I had material left over, that I decided I would write a book and include some of the scenes that we didn't quite make it into the documentary.
Oh, that's interesting. So one can still find the documentary?
The documentary still airs on PBS stations, especially around Halloween.
Oh, excellent, yes. And then they were both published in the same year, were they?
No, they were. This one came first. Haunting of Louisiana came first, and then it did quite well. And so then my publisher asked if I would do one for Mississippi. So then I did The Haunting of Mississippi.
How did you identify the sites in Mississippi? I mean, Louisiana is well known.
Right.
What about Mississippi? How did that come about?
I was actually a little bit skeptical about doing The Haunting of Mississippi, and I told my publisher that. And I just decided I would take a road trip. And as I ventured around Mississippi and got to some of the rural towns, I found some of the most fascinating stories and met some of the most intriguing people who shared some of Mississippi's history with me. And it turned out to be one of my favorite books.
Oh, that's wonderful. And then you moved to Cape Cod.
Right.
And that was how long ago?
It will be 4 years.
And did you begin the Cape Cod haunting book?
Right away, because again, my publisher knew I was coming up here, and so within the first year that I was here, I did The Haunting of Cape Cod.
And how did you identify? There's some 24 or so sites that you have documented, and how did you identify them?
Well, I started off actually with the documentary that I had to develop a criteria, because the documentary for PBS is 56 minutes and 40 seconds long, so I had to narrow the field. So the way that I narrowed the field is I decided that I would only use ghost tales that were circulating in the community, were at least 100 years old, and connected to a historic site or a historic person.
And these were written down somewhere, or how did you find them?
Some of them oral tradition, some of them bits and pieces in books of folklore. And then when I came to Cape Cod, what I did was start going from town to town and going to the historic sites, historic house museums, and learning the stories and learning the tales, and then doing the research. And every book that I write, I always go to visit the site in person.
And you did a lot of interviews with many of these occur in taverns and restaurants and of course some historic homes. And it seems as though you've interviewed many of the owners. Was that difficult for them to open up and tell you what was going on?
They're, let's say, a little bit more conservative here in New England than in New Orleans. But once you get to know someone, they will share their stories with you, and some places there is, as Sheila Fitzgerald will say at her restaurant, that it adds a little extra spice to their restaurant, a little extra allure, so Sheila doesn't mind sharing the stories. Other places don't advertise, like at the Old South Church in Nantucket. It's not that they say, oh, this is a haunted church. But when I went there for the first time, the congregation, immediately, everyone kept talking about Seth, the first minister, who was there from 1810 to 1833, and they believe he's still there. They have no doubt at all.
When you speak with the owners, you do say, you let them know that you're going to quote them. You ask if that's permission for that. Do they sign a release, or they just give you permission?
They just give me permission. I mean, I'm used to it from doing television, where we just do an oral release as we're doing the interview. And yes, and here I'm very upfront. I tell them that I'm writing a book of folklore about the Cape, and that I would be sharing the story, and I've never had anyone refuse.
And they ask to see what you've written, or do you give them complimentary copies? How does that work? There's a lot of complimentary copies.
That's a lot of complimentary copies. Yes, some people I do give complimentary copies. Others just come and, for example, Sheila, she came and she ordered them to carry at her restaurant to give away to some of her favorite guests.
Very good, very good. Of the stories that you wrote, is there one in particular that impresses you the most in this book?
In this book, well, I love Seth at the Old South Church because I'm just amazed that you would think of a Unitarian Universalist church, people would be a little bit more conservative, and everyone was just so open talking about him, and they still blame him for a lot of the incidents at the church. I am particularly fond of stories of children. For example, Susan at the Simmons Homestead in Hyannis. So those are the ones that really touch my heart when you hear about a child who dies early and that her spirit might still be lingering on.
Yeah, I was particularly impressed with Black Sam the pirate,
Oh,
Sam Bellamy,
of course,
and poor
yeah.
Maria.
Poor Maria, and the interesting thing about Black Sam Bellamy is that there are original source documents.
That's what I was going to ask you next. Where do you, what are your sources?
We know that he existed. Barry Clifford, who discovered the wreck of the Witta, which is the only pirate ship that's ever been actually documented. He's pulled up the bell, and the wreck of the Witta is actually right off of Cape Cod. And so we know all about Sam and his exploits. We know he came to the Cape in 1714. We know he went to Florida to look for a treasure that supposedly was littered on the ocean floor. We know he turned pirate, and we know that within 2 years, he and his crew were wildly successful as pirates and captured the bounty from something like 52 ships in 1 year. 52 ships, and came back to the Cape. But then also with Sam, there's this wonderful story of his love interest, Maria. Maria Hallett, Hallett is a very common name on the Cape, and yet to date, no one has found any document whatsoever to prove that Maria existed. We can't find a gravestone, we can't find any kind of record of her birth, of her death, but yet those two stories, those two legends, are very closely intertwined. And when people talk about Sam, they also talk about Maria.
So it's mostly oral tradition that there was a Maria, that she was 15 years old when she fell in love with him. A very tragic story about her pregnant,
and she, after Sam leaves, she finds out she's pregnant, the baby dies, she's accused of killing her baby, she's accused of witchcraft, she's stoned out of town. We have all of these incredible oral stories that are still told today.
In your estimation, do the sites differ in the kinds of ghost tales that you hear between Louisiana, Mississippi, and then the southern states and Cape Cod? Are they similar?
Both. I think both. There are differences. Again, people in the South really treasure their past. And not that they don't do here, but they're much more open about it, to the point when they are talking about a deceased relative, it's as if that person could walk through the door at any moment and sit down at the table next to you. So when you're interviewing someone, as I had like Ruth Bodenheimer at the Leno Mansion, she's talking about the original owner of the house. And when she was talking about him, my cameraman who was with me, she said, oh, I need to go get one of his books. And she goes out of the room, and my cameraman says to me, well, if he's so important to the story, why are we not interviewing him? And I said, well, I'd love to, but he's been dead for 300 years. So, but she was talking about him in the present. And when she came back into the room, she overheard us, and she laughed and she said, oh, don't worry about it. She said, my coworkers thought that he was some secret lover that I had living in the house with me.
Now, in your travels amongst these 3 books, did you experience any phenomenon yourself?
I used to be quite, try and take the PBS neutral stance and say, I'm open to the possibilities. Now I'm just like, yeah, sure, whatever. And yes, I've seen things that I can't explain, and I'll tell you real briefly a really funny story. We were shooting a documentary, and I had my cameraman next to me, and my audio guy was on this side. And I'm interviewing a gentleman who used to live in this old plantation house. We're outside on the gallery. There's a window behind him. And during the course of the interview, which is going very well, a woman, and the house is boarded up, by the way, a woman sticks her head through the window, and I thought, ah, she ruined my interview. And so I whisper to my cameraman, is she in the shot? Is she in the shot? Because he'll start on a wide shot, and then he'll go in close. He doesn't answer me, so I think we're fine. After the interview was over and we're driving back to New Orleans, I said, oh, it's a good thing you were on a close-up, and the window was no longer in the shot, so you couldn't see the woman. And he looked at me and he goes, Barbara, I don't know what you're talking about. And I turned to my audio guy and I said, well, you saw her, didn't you? And he goes, Miss Barbara, I promise you, I didn't see anything. So here, I saw this woman in the window as clearly as I'm seeing you. And I have a person on this side of me and a person on that side of me. We're all looking in the same direction. And neither one of them sees her. I'm the only one that sees her. So I have no explanation.
And was she attached to that house? I mean, was she in the folklore of that house?
No, there had been no ghost story with this house. So I had no preconceived notions, and we weren't doing a documentary about ghosts. So it was just something that happened that I, to this day, cannot explain.
How long did it take you to go through all of your research and actually sit down to write this book?
For the Kate book, it took about a year. About a year, about 6 months of going to each location, then logging my interviews, and then deciding how I would put them together, and then just getting the manuscript to the publisher in time.
And your publisher, which is Pelican Publishers, based in Louisiana.
It's based in Louisiana, yes.
And they were okay to have you do a Yankee book.
Well, they publish books nationally from every topic. They're very big on histories. No, and they were the ones that wanted me to do the book, knowing that I was going to be up here. So no, there's no prejudice. And I'm actually was born and raised in New York.
Oh,
so,
New York City, or
just outside New York City. So I've been both ends.
Yeah. What made you, well, you said when we were talking about you have a daughter who lives in Massachusetts.
Right.
That's what propelled you to come up
That was part of the reason that I
to-
came up
to
here,
move,
yes, because she has 2 young children, so I wasn't getting to see them as much as I would like to.
Now, are you working on something now? Something
I'm
different?
actually working on 2 novels, 2 mystery novels. I'm done with one and about halfway through the other. And since it's the same main character, my goal right now is to finish the second one before I bring the first one to my publisher. And I'll be going back to New Orleans in February to do a 4.5-hour live show on Mardi Gras.
Oh, really? Let me just back up a second.
Yeah.
Where are the mystery novels going to be set?
Oh, they're actually going to be set in a little rural town called St. Francisville in North Louisiana, and they're set right after Hurricane Katrina.
Oh, interesting. Very, interesting time, interesting
Right,
setting. Tell me about your film career, which is extensive. Give me the shorthand version.
The shorthand version.
How did you get into film?
I got into film. My major actually is theater and speech. I moved to New Orleans shortly after I got married, and there wasn't a lot of theater there that I was interested in, and I decided to go back to school to get my master's in communication. One of my professors let me know there was a job opening at the local PBS station. I applied for it, and luckily I got it. So that's sort of my start, and then I switched from PBS, did a lot of commercial television, did a lot of trade show news programs, and then I started my own video production company and did cultural documentaries. And now I freelance pretty much for PBS.
You've given up on your own company?
Yes. Well, one of the things I had it for, 8 years, is, running your own business, there's a lot of administrative work. And I finally reached the point that I wasn't doing what I love to do, which is the actual production and being able to go out in the field and, working on a show. And so that's when I decided that, I'd rather figure out a way to get back to what I love to do.
The book on Biloxi Memories and was it the Broadmoor Hotel?
Yes, yeah.
It reminds me very much of Atlantic City, the little bit that I've read about it.
It has that same flavor
And this
to
started as a PBS documentary?
It started, yes. Yeah, that was a work for hire as part of my freelance career. And they hired me to do a documentary, a 1-hour documentary on the city of Biloxi. It's it was the first capital of the Louisiana Purchase, and it went from a small fishing village to sort of what Atlantic City became, which was this casino town.
And we sort of know Biloxi Blues from Neil Simon.
Yes, from Neil Simon, yes.
And how do you integrate that? I mean, it seems like you've done it very well between books and documentaries, but now you're venturing off into something different with your fiction, your mystery fiction.
I love the challenge of writing, and I love the challenge of writing for different mediums. You know, there's a different way of doing it for television because it's visual and you have to think about the images and the pictures. And then when you write a book, you have to think about the descriptions and make sure that your reader can see what you're seeing. So yeah, switching gears a lot, and I like it. I like that challenge.
Do you write the scripts as well for?
Yes.
Did you?
Yes, I do I'm very hands-on. I produce, I direct, and I write them. Yes.
And script writing is quite different from expository writing.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about those differences, because not everybody can bridge that.
I think you just have to keep in mind who your audience is, whether it's someone reading the printed word or it's someone seeing it, and you tend to use less verbiage, less narrative for television, and you try and let the pictures tell the story as much as possible. Whereas in the book, obviously, you have to find those key phrases, that wonderful plot to keep the people turning the page. And I'm very big on transitions. You know, getting
what do you mean when you say that?
Excuse me?
What do you mean when you say that?
Well, getting from one chapter to the next, so that as you're finishing this, let's say chapter 2, you make sure that there is a sentence or a paragraph that really compels the reader to go to the next chapter, that they don't want to put the book down. You want to give them that, oh, there's more coming.
Right. This is what I mean by the sausage making. This
Yes.
is very, very useful
There has to be a little
for
bit
writers.
of a, for me, there has to be some kind of a tease, but it has to flow naturally. So I'm very, very aware of that flow from one to the next.
And do you use an editor, or do you just edit it yourself, and then, or the publisher provides an editor? How does that work for you?
I edit myself. There is, I do work with a senior editor at Pelican, but I do self-edit, and I guess because this is what I've done for the last 30 years. I'm pretty aware of what I need to do, and I'm pretty aware of my flaws and what I need to go back and check.
Right. Now, with your new books, have you already considered about turning perhaps them into a film script?
A little bit, because I find I've had a couple of people be readers for me, and they have said to me, oh, I can see this as a television program, or I can see this as a film. So I guess that is always with me. That is just how I do things. So yeah, I mean, I don't have an intention of doing it that way, but if it evolves that way, that would be great.
Writing for film, well, the vicissitudes of film scripts, knowing where to go, what to do with them, having them succeed, having them fail, these are all things that writers really don't experience unless they start doing it. Right. Tell me a little bit about some of the obstacles that you've come about, both in doing your film work and in doing your writing.
Well, the hardest thing about writing for television, for film, is that you have all of this equipment, you have a crew, you have schedules, you're worried about things like if you're shooting outdoors, you're worried about the weather, the proper light, if you're shooting indoors. So it's not just going out or sitting at home and putting the words on paper. You have to make sure that you can make it happen. And you have to be aware of budgets as well, because sure, I can write this script, you know, Gone with the Wind, I can have battles, I can have all kinds of things going on. But if I only have a $100,000 budget, that's not possible. Right. So I have to write it in such a way that it physically can become a reality. And the joy of writing for print is that you can make up whatever scenes you want, you know, whatever your imagination creates, you can put that into your plot. So for me, in one sense, it's easier to write a book than it is to do, for example, a documentary.
It's freer, most certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just you by yourself.
Yeah. You've recently mentioned that you were elected to the board of Cape Cod Writers. Cape Cod
Writers Center.
Yes. Talk a little bit about that and what they do.
Well, they have individual writers groups throughout the Cape. Some of them for fiction, some of them for nonfiction. I think there's a couple of groups for people that are memoirs. And the groups also tend from people who are published or then there are other groups for aspiring authors. They have things like Pathways to Publication, which are like meetings where you can learn more about it. They have Writers' Night Out, which you came to our last one for Christmas.
Yes,
And so it's good
that was very
networking.
interesting.
Yeah.
Give me your impression. There was a young woman who gave a presentation on how authors can use social media.
Right.
Give me your impressions of that.
Well, I thought she was excellent, but it was a lot of information. And unless you were going to Twitter and you used Facebook and you had your website, it was hard to keep up with all that information. Luckily, she did hand out a printed sheet so that you could go back. Social media, I use some of it.
You do have a website.
I do have a website, www.barbaraSillery.com, simply my name, very, very easy. I haven't really gotten into Twitter, and I haven't used Instagram. So I may explore that for my 2 books of fiction, but I haven't really gotten into that as yet.
And the other ones you mentioned were Facebook and LinkedIn. Have you done those?
And it's funny, I feel like I have sort of this two-edged sword. I've been very fortunate that I have had a lot of work, a lot of assignments. And so while I've done Facebook and I've done my website, I haven't really had a lot of time to get into LinkedIn, but I do want to because I've had a lot of people request that I join theirs. So I do need to reciprocate sometime soon.
Now, publishers don't do as much for authors now as they used to.
No, their budgets are limited as well.
The legacy publishers, even those, tend not to really promote their authors in the way they used to. Indie publishers like Pelican and others. What does Pelican do for you? I know my publisher doesn't do very much for me. What does yours do for you?
They will book, when the book first comes out, they will book signings. They act as my distributor. They handle all of the sales. So they deal with the independent bookstores. They do some promotion. They put, if I'm doing a speaking, they will put something up on their website. They'll create like a little graphic. And so
they will get your book cover?
Yes.
They do.
They do. They handle
and
all
the
of that.
ISBN
yes,
number
and, they
things of that nature.
Oh, yes, all of that. They do the book cover. They do although I pretty much pick what I want to have on the book. I sort of do the basic design, and then their in-house graphic person does the rest. I started to say, oh, and in the back of my book, I do want to point out that in the back of all my books are addresses of all the sites. So that if people want to go and see for themselves, they can just turn to the back of the book and use it as sort of a little haunted travel log. But getting back to Pelican, they've been pretty good about handling all of the other aspects so that as an author, I can devote myself to writing. Do I wish they would do more promotion? Obviously, of course. I wish they would spend thousands of dollars on me. But again, with independent publishers, oh, and by the way, they automatically do put all of my books on Amazon, so they're available in print form and as ebooks, and I don't have to do anything about that, which is lovely.
Yes, it is. And when you have your new books published, you're going to come back and tell us all about those.
Certainly will.
It's been a pleasure. It went very fast. Thank you so much,
Thank
Barbara.
you for having me.
A pleasure. Now will you go see your daughter after this?